What's up, Airsofters? Today we're stepping out of the usual product reviews to talk about a role that often gets overlooked, misunderstood, or underappreciated: the Airsoft machine gunner. It's a role that looks cool on paper. Big gun, big ammo count, big presence. But actually playing it, well, that takes planning, awareness, discipline, and a willingness to do the job most players avoid. It's also one of the few positions in Airsoft that truly rewards you for understanding the rules of the game and using them to your advantage. So, if you've ever wanted to run an LMG or squad automatic weapon and do more than just spray and pray, then this video's for you. We're gonna break down kind of some of the things about LMGs, MMGs, and their use kind of widely through Airsoft, which is why I brought in Spencer once again, who is our resident expert in kind of the upper echelons of Milsim, being a veteran of Milsim West and other really grueling ways to enjoy the game of Airsoft, and kind of more of the casual side of things from my perspective. Let's get right into it. Now, before we get into some of the finer talking points here, I think it's important to start the video with a definition of sorts, talking about kind of machine guns writ large in Airsoft. They go by different definitions. I think a lot of the time the lay person, right, just the standard Airsofter, will refer to all machine guns as LMGs. And that's not exactly accurate for real firearms, nor is it all that accurate for Airsoft guns. Although everything does fire the same caliber round in Airsoft, there are some differences, and those are as replications of their real firearm counterparts. So, Spencer, what qualifies as an LMG?
So an LMG, I mean, for our purposes, realistically, it's going to be the real gun counterpart. What kind of cartridge does it use? So like an intermediate rifle cartridge, like this would be like 5.45 or 7.62x39, or even like a SAW would use a 5.56. That's an intermediate rifle cartridge, so we would call that an LMG. It could be drum fed or belt fed. Realistically, we base it off of what does the real gun cartridge
Right,
fire.
right. So, and then by SAW, you're referencing the M249. Again, I think the word SAW is, or the acronym of SAW is generally thrown in to represent anything that fires fully automatic. When you are using that as a defined term, it is specifically referencing the M249.
Yeah, and there's so many variations of that platform too, Mark 46 and such like that. But realistically, like a belt-fed 5.56 FN produced.
Yeah, like a NATO. Like, I mean, the Stoner is also a squad automatic weapon, but it is not a SAW, right?
Yeah.
So, okay, so that kind of gives us a better understanding of what an LMG is. An MMG is, I'll be honest, kind of a newer term for me, because I'm kind of the camp that kind of always referred to them as LMGs or SAWs. So what is an MMG and how does it differ?
So medium machine gun is just going to be the scaled up round. It's going to be like a full rifle round, like a PKM or PKP uses a 7.62x54R, which is a much larger round. A NATO counterpart would be like a FN M240 or the Mark 48, which uses 7.62x51.
Okay, so that's a much more narrow segment in Airsoft.
Yes, in olden days, you could have machine gun rolls that would still use that larger cartridge, but were considered light machine guns, and it had more to do with implementation. But I think this colloquial usage is a lot more easy to understand.
Okay, now there is also a third category, and that's heavy machine guns. Generally not something you see in Airsoft all that much.
Yeah, not very much.
50 caliber stuff. You might see one that's vehicle mounted in an Airsoft game that has something like that, but for all intents and purposes, for this discussion, we're going to be mostly talking about LMGs and MMGs, because that's what you're going to be fielding and actually running around with. Okay, so let's move on from definitions to talk about kind of the mission set. I guess I'll start from my perspective, because I think that's a little bit more broad. When you go to Milsim events, or even like maybe to some degree like weekend casual games, machine guns, LMGs, MMGs are often fielded by a handful, smattering of people that like the look of them, or they're willing to lug around the weight. And with more casual Milsim events, or ones that are less grueling than, you know, kind of like that Milsim West tier of involvement. Some of the, you know, slightly more casual Milsim games don't break people into specific machine gun squads, right? So you might have, you know, one or two guys that are part of a rifle squad moving around a game, or, you know, if you're just going to a pickup game or a weekend game, you know, you might see individuals just running around with machine guns. And the mission set, oftentimes what you'll find is that machine gunners are in smaller squads that are serving two purposes. The first of which is to get kills, right? That's a lot of the rule sets of these milsim games allow for machine gunners to shoot full auto, especially when rifles are limited to shooting semi-auto only. A lot of these games also have magazine restrictions, so a rifleman will have, between 6 or 7 mid-cap magazines for semi-auto only, so maybe they're carrying 1,500 to 2,000 rounds, whereas a squad automatic, or an LMG or MMG user has the option of, the advantage of going full auto, as well as having a 4,000 round or more round count. So you don't have to reload as often, but the sacrifice is that you're carrying all that ammo kind of on the weapons platform all the time. So in addition to, the kind of mission one being create casualties, right? You want to progress up the field via attrition, eliminating enemy players, but also helping to facilitate the capturing of objectives and moving the mission forward. I think that's where you'll see it most frequently at, some of the more casual Airsoft games and weekend games and stuff. How does that kind of mission set change when you're getting into more grueling milsim games where you do have maybe a more defined role?
Well, so Milsim West is realistically about trying to emulate the experience of being in an infantry unit or platoon. And so the different LMGs or medium machine guns would be implemented the same way that an infantry unit does. And so based on the capabilities of how those real weapon systems uses how you would put it into the platoon. So like a light machine gun, at the rules at Milsim West would say there's, just like a rifleman, there's no medium engagement distance. Anyone's allowed to use full auto, there's no semi-restriction. But the LMG will get 1,500 rounds. They get 3 times as much as a normal rifleman, which allows them to make use of their drum mags if they have any, or they can just use the full auto as needed. Realistically, the 500 rounds is meant to restrict the rifleman from just shooting, spraying all the time. Okay. Whether you have companies or platoons or 2 squads or just 2 fire teams, you usually want to set up what you're doing with a support element and a maneuver element, right? So all the way down to a fire team, you can have one guy with some sort of LMG, and then the rest of the guys are a maneuver element.
I see.
And so it'll be small enough, and it's got an intermediate cartridge, so it's easy to carry a ton of ammo.
That's for LMGs.
Yeah, for LMGs. And realistically, the bigger part about a medium machine gun is you probably have more range and more firepower when it gets to that range. So you would use a medium machine gun for kind of a bigger scale engagement. So rather than just a fire team or a squad kind of maneuvering, something like that, you would the weapon squad, which you would have as your 4th squad in the platoon, might have 3 medium machine guns, and they're really going to be like, okay, we're really doing a big deliberate movement. We're going to try and take out a ton of people, and then so you put your guns in a very specific spot to kind of set that up like an ambush or something.
So one of the things that I've noticed about, quite a few of the milsim events that I've gone to, there might be an objective in-game on the map that needs to be captured, or there might be some movement that the upper command has, given the squads a mission to do. And most of the time you'll find machine gunners just kind of blanket laying down fire so that other airsofters, riflemen, can move toward that objective or move forward or whatever. Is the concentration on more like deliberate squad tactics and actual like in-game replication of real movements as fire teams in Milsim West, does that change how the LMG and MMG are deployed in-game? Does that change the dynamic of how a fire team would be using a platform like this as opposed to something that you might see, at like an AMS game or like an Op Lion Claw game where you might just see a machine gunner just laying down fire at a bunch of dudes running across the street?
Yeah, I think so. So doing something like a raid like that, like you're like, I know there's a target exactly here, we're gonna go get it and then try and escape, right? Having a proper amount of LMGs and medium machine guns in my platoon, I know that I can get containment on the objective, set up inner and outer cordon. So like if I get containment by putting up the guns facing the objective, clearing anybody that's shooting out, then set up the guns on avenues where people might try and reinforce that objective, because I need to send the assault squads into the building or something like that, and those guys can trust that the guys with the medium machine guns and maybe some LMGs would be outside protecting the target so that they don't have to worry about what's going on outside. And like it's all about like, rather than walking around and be like, okay, where's some guys I can shoot at, or is there some guys in here? There's some guys over there. It's like, I'm gonna sit on the street and make sure that no one comes down it.
Right.
Because the guys that inside are trusting me to do that.
I feel like the adoption of that kind of ethos, or at least that sort of strategy, would really cut down on some of the building to building fighting you see at a lot of milsim events where, you know, a squad of 3 to 8 dudes can take over a building, and then the building's wiped, and then they move on, and they just encounter fire at the next building and the next building on, and nothing kind of gets held for very long. Incorporating like proper tactics and squad dynamics can help kind of move along the capturing of certain points, even in a movement, and not even specifically to achieve an objective. Like if you've got Overwatch from machine guns, and they have their job, and they're fulfilling that job to allow the riflemen or your assault team to do their job. I feel like that would severely cut down on the feeling that you're just running around in circles at like a regular milsim game.
I mean, back to the topic of this video, sometimes it's hard to find guys that want to do it because they don't necessarily know what to do.
Right.
And I think the experience, put yourself in the role and you try and do that experience, it's rewarding, but it's not necessarily intuitive of what you need to do.
Right.
Coming from just an airsoft background, if you go to a school of infantry, I'm sure you know what to do, but just being an airsofter, it's not necessarily apparent.
Sure. Well, I think that's an excellent segue into talking about personal/physical recommendations. I don't want to say requirements, but personal/physical recommendations that we might have for somebody who's interested in performing this role in an airsoft game. Don't get me wrong. I think platforms like the featherweight here that weighs under 10 pounds and gives you a 2,500 round magazine opens up the door to a lot of people that are maybe not the fittest or the strongest to do a role that might otherwise have required a lot of strength or a lot of endurance. But when you are talking about like heavier platforms, especially when we're talking about the 240 and the PKM and the PKP, they tend to be quite a bit heavier.
Yeah.
So what kind of suggestions can we make to somebody who is looking to do this role in the way that it will maximize both the fun that they're having and their usefulness on the field?
I wouldn't necessarily suggest having any fitness goals that are beyond what I would suggest for anybody necessarily. I mean, I think a reasonable amount of fitness is probably good for just about everybody, but you
should be able to run around.
Yeah, the thing is like an LMG or a medium machine gun is not useful unless you get it into the right position to engage the enemy.
Right. Well, to just quickly touch on that, I feel like most of the time people think, oh, well, I've got full auto, so I can afford to just mosey on up to the objective and then just stand in place and put some full auto fire down, and then I'll mosey on over to the other objective. When it sounds like what you're saying is you need to be running fast and getting on an objective before the rifleman.
Yeah, realistically, if you're getting to a raid, you want to set containment first. So you would probably set this. You arrive at the ORP, and the next you got to look at setting the guns. So getting the guns in position before the assault element even moves is important because they're not going to go up there unless they have like Overwatch already.
Right.
So you need to be like the first person on. I would
so
say
your two fastest guys in a squad is your medic and your squad gunner.
Yeah. Realistically, what you need to look at is, do you have enough physical fitness for you to move around the battle space quickly and easily with the weight and burden of how heavy your gun is?
Right.
Right? Like
if that's a featherweight,
great. If it's a featherweight, cool. If it's a
PKM.
LCT, PKP, it's a different story.
Real quick, we switched out guns so we can, we keep pointing behind us, but it's easier to see when they're in front of us. But this kind of represents kind of the two ends of the spectrum. Weight-wise.
The featherweight M249, or there's a 249 Para, these are all polymer bodies, so they're super light and they're really short and easy to run around with. This would be an LMG because it uses the intermediate cartridge.
Right.
And then PKM, actually there's a PK.
I'd say this is what, 14, 15 pounds?
Something like that. This isn't the heaviest medium machine gun, but it's certainly like big and unwieldy.
Right.
Like you really need to like pay attention to what you're doing when you're running.
And it's something to get used to too, beyond just its width or its weight, is how wide the box magazines are, especially on these. They're big, and you get caught in doorways and on bushes and just about everything else you're trying to get through. Whereas a smaller box mag, not as unloaded.
Yeah, this one isn't as bad. And this one, like you can you have it slung, and you walk around, and it
Kicks it way out.
Kicks it way out, and then it'll disconnect the box mag on your gear.
Got it. So to a large degree, in addition to kind of being physically comfortable with carrying this around, and remember, we're talking about milsim games where, at least on the less strenuous side, you might be in an airsoft game at an AMS event or at a Op Lion Claw event for 4, 5, 6 hours, 8 hours, and then of course there's the events that you really enjoyed that are 40-hour games.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that's not to say that you're carrying this for 40 hours straight, but you have 40 hours of continuous time where you are in game when you could be moving around with this.
Yeah, and so you're obviously going to have like some rest times where you're taking a nap or sleeping or something like that, and you're not carrying the gun. But the thing is you need to be able to stand up and be ready to fire at any time.
Right.
So that your gun operating needs to be incredibly reliable.
Right. Actually, another great way to segment, let's talk about reliability and some of the things that you might want to keep in mind if you're interested in being a machine gunner in a milsim game. Let's talk really quick about some of the differences internally from with LMGs as compared to standard rifle variants. I know for a long time, I'm going to concentrate on the M249 first. I know for a long time there were manufacturers that had a different gearbox than a standard M4. Mm-hmm. And to a large degree that's kind of gone away now, and they're mostly version 2s.
Well, it depends on the model. There's a couple that are version 2. The Featherweight uses a version 2 style gearbox, and then the G&P 249 series uses their regular G&P version 2. But everything else, I think, pretty much is like the thick brick kind.
Like the A&K style?
Yeah, and so the idea is that if it's such a massive piece of metal, like it'll be hard to crack. If you decide to use like a heavy spring and you're shooting a ton, it'll be like much more difficult to crack.
Right. All that to say that even though the gearbox shell is different, parts are pretty readily available to maintain these.
Yeah, all of the internal parts that go inside of the gearbox are pretty much kind of uniform. They're super easy to get.
Right. And the reason why that's important is because these can do full auto, and because most of the game rule sets allow these to have slightly higher FPS and full auto rate of fire up to about 30, depending on the rule set that you're in. So these are under quite a bit more stress than maybe a rifleman or an M4 or an AK would be under normal use, running on full auto for an entire day. So things dry out, wear out. You have one of the big things that I think a lot of people forget is buckings. Mm-hmm. Right, and maybe even keeping spare buckings, and that's because of like the friction of doing full auto on the bucking constantly.
Yeah, especially with an AEG, like if you've ever kind of shot the air out of the gearbox, the air feels a little warm, and so there's constantly friction going on inside of the gearbox, and it's shooting like warm air. I don't know how hot it actually is, but out, and then the bucking lip is fluttering at 20 times per second. And so that bucking can kind of start to heat up and get loose, and then it can lead you into pinch jams or low FPS or some kind of issue like that. So being able to like on the fly, and like a lot of these have detachable barrels that pop out real quick. So being able to like, if you plan to shoot 10,000 rounds in a game, it's like, okay, maybe they'll bring 2 extra buckings just in case. And then knowing how to disassemble it and swap the bucking out real quick is a really good plan.
And most of the time, you can't really do that kind of in game. You'll need to probably wait until you go back to the FOB, because I know at least in AMS's rules and a lot of other rule sets, you can't just dump fresh BBs or do any repairs kind of when you're in combat. You have to wait until you're at regen or back at the staging area to do new repairs. But having extra parts really helpful so that your gun doesn't go down and you're out of the game for the whole weekend. Now, I would say that's a far cry from the way things were even 5 or 10 years ago, when it was pretty common practice for people to have entire replacement gearboxes just in case things went down. But thankfully, most of the stuff that you can get kind of out of the box these days, like from retail, is more than serviceable.
Yeah,
like they're super reliable and performance is good out of the box, so you shouldn't need to bring along extra gearboxes. But replacement parts like barrels, buckings, extra batteries, things like that.
I would also say box mags, spare box mags too, because one of the other things to think about is if you're running a lot of heavy BBs, a lot of the times the manufacturers maybe make these for .2s.
Sure.
And so if you're shooting .4s, it's literally double the weight of all
on the gear
BBs.
That's trying to feed it.
And so that gear is trying to push it up, and maybe it gives up at some point. And so having I mean, it kind of fits the role if you've got like a couple box mag pouches on your rig and
Oh,
stuff.
true,
And
yeah.
so you just like have one extra spare functioning box mag, and then it's like, okay, I can swap out real quick, and then you're not out of the fight.
One important thing to remember as well is that I would say 90% of box mags are powered by their own separate battery from the AEG, right? Whether it's a 9-volt or a couple AA's or something separate, right? Even the ones that have a Dean's connector. I can't tell you how many milsim events I've been to where someone's walking around asking for a battery for their box mag or their drum mag. It doesn't matter how good this is if you can't feed BBs.
Yeah, and so, I mean, if everything goes well, you shoot a ton of BBs, and
Right.
then your batteries die, and so
You need backups
having
anyway.
backup batteries on you is a good idea.
Since we've covered kind of the fitness aspect of things, the slight differences in things, kind of the mission difference of machine guns versus kind of riflemen's counterparts, I wanted to briefly go back and touch on kind of rule sets and advantages and disadvantages of going to a platform like this over being a traditional rifleman. Now, I can't speak to the Milsim West angle, but I can tell you that in my experience at American Milsim, there are some distinct advantages going into a support, they call it a squad support weapon class in their rule set. And as of 2025, their rule set allows, instead of the 1.5 joule limit for riflemen, SSWs can shoot, I think, 1.8 joules or 1.8 joules, and can go full auto up to 30 rounds per second. There is a restriction on minimum engagement distance for SSWs in AMS's rules. I think it's 60 feet, as opposed to riflemen having a 0 engagement distance. And you can't fire them in buildings, but you can fire them out of buildings as long as you break the plane of the building. That means sticking the barrel or the muzzle beyond the plane of the window or the door. Major advantage here, like I mentioned earlier in the video, is the ability to carry more rounds, right? So you're talking about 4,000 rounds versus, 7 magazines of, between 120 and 250 rounds a piece. So considerably more BBs, and you get to shoot full auto, which is really freaking cool. And you get to walk around with all these extra box magazines, although they're empty. How does that differ from the specific rule set that you might encounter at an MSW game? There's no distinction, SSW, with AMS's rules between LMGs and medium machine guns. It's just a squad support weapon.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
sorry.
Milsim West does have a distinction between rifleman, light machine gun, medium machine gun. And so like a rifleman, just similarly to like AMS would be 0 minimum engagement distance, like 1.5 joule FPS restriction. And then there's no restriction on how many magazines you can use. You can use full auto, and there's no rate of fire restrictions at all. Light machine gun, the difference is you get issued 500 rounds as a rifleman.
Right, so you can carry as many magazines as you want. You can put one BB in 500 magazines.
Yeah, you're not gonna get enough BBs to fill them up.
Yeah, I don't know.
So a light machine gun will get 1,500 rounds. And so if it's something like an RPK or a IAR M27 kind of deal that can use mid-caps, you could use the mid-caps too, or you could use the appropriate drum mag that works. And it doesn't matter how many BBs it holds, they're just only gonna give you 1,500 rounds.
So if you wanted to carry multiples for the realism of changing out box magazines, you could split that between
You could if you want to.
3. Do you see people do that? Is that a thing?
Not much, not
Okay,
much.
well.
Again, it's 1.5 joules, semi or full auto, no minimum engagement distance. It's really just that you have the opportunity, they'll give you more rounds in order to you be able to engage the battle space.
Right, right.
Medium machine guns is you're going to increase the joule rating up to 2.09, I think, 2.1.
Oh, interesting.
So it's like, I think that's like 475 with 2 O's.
Sure.
You get 3,000 rounds. You get double what a light machine gun does. So it just gives you even more rounds to engage the battlefield more.
Right.
And then,
Well, and oftentimes you'll have a longer barrel, so you'll be slightly more accurate.
yeah, and realistically, it comes to, I think that because you have limited ammo, you can't just buy it and bring it yourself and supply yourself with as much ammo as you want. It's limited by how much supply your unit gets. Realistically, it's important to make sure that your gun is tuned to the utmost of what you can get out of it. Like, so if you want a medium machine gun, you want to make sure that you're really getting the range.
Right.
Being able to shoot 2.1 joules, you certainly have that opportunity if you have like a good setup.
Well, it's okay. Now, out of curiosity, generally, and I learned this from you, you build or you upgrade a gearbox based on a target BB weight, right? Like when we're building, when I build in my M4s, right? I've got in mind that I want to optimize my performance at shooting like 2.8s and 3.2s, because that's where that's the weight of BB I use most often. When you're building an LMG or an MMG, if you're building it to meet a specific rule set requirement, right? If you're trying to hit that 2 joule limit, do you know what weight of BBs they're going to issue you? Is that like a standardized thing? Or do you have to kind of build this knowing that, hey, this game, they might throw 2 5s at me, or I might get a bag of 2 8s and make adjustments from there?
Short answer is no, you generally don't. You're not sure of what you're going to get.
Okay.
But typically, what they have the most of is 2 8s, 3 2s, and then they usually have some 4 O's, but almost nobody wants them. So if you're that guy that's like, give me all the 4 O's, they'll be like, okay, cool. And sometimes you'll get them, which usually, anytime you see
Dude,
somebody
475,
yeah,
4 O's. Wow.
Yeah. So anytime we usually see like some guy that's got like a PK and it's HPA converted, which means that you've got more air volume to push out, then usually it's like, you want some 4 O's, and they're like, yeah, give them. So the 4 O's with an HPA setup would like really give you some terrific range. Realistically, what I would do is, if you're setting up your volume matching, I would choose setting it up for the heavier weight, like 3 2s.
Sure.
Because I would rather be over volumed and shooting out too much air than be, which just means like you'll get a little extra noise and that kind of thing, and it might not be as inefficient. But if
versus the opposite,
if you tune for lower weight BBs and then you're shooting something that's too heavy, it might affect your accuracy.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Speaking of internal stuff that we kind of were discussing, I know I mentioned that kind of gearboxes are more high performing and reliable than they've been in the past. You're going to get a more reliable platform that doesn't necessarily need upgrading right out of the box most of the time. We talked about bringing along extra buckings and things like that. Now, while that is true, we're also seeing a lot of people go for ultimate reliability by ditching the gearbox entirely.
Yeah, realistically, AEGs over the years have gotten, like, what comes out of the box is better. So it was pretty bad 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And so everything's kind of evolved a little bit. But HPA, any of these guns that we've talked about today, you can convert to HPA, and what you'll get out of it is much more, it puts out more volume of air, so you can push heavier BBs more consistently, and which will give you really good range and really good tight groupings. And the other thing is they're more reliable to shoot thousands and thousands of rounds consistently. I would say the drawbacks being it's a huge money investment into your gun. And if you're doing something like Milsim West, where you have to like basically carry all of your equipment on you for the entire event immediately,
all the air you need. Yeah,
you're gonna have like several tanks in your ruck, or have a friend and call him your assistant gunner, and then he's gonna carry some tanks too.
Well, I hope we, helped to dispel some of the kind of mystery that comes along with machine guns in Airsoft, giving you guys a little bit more information about kind of the types that are available, how they're used, some of the considerations that come into play about both maintenance of yourself in terms of your physical preparedness to run platforms like these, and as well as kind of the maintenance requirements and performance of the guns themselves. If you guys are interested in more content like this, where Spencer and I take kind of more deep dives in some of the different rule sets for different popular milsim games, or if you wanted to take further kind of looks into other popular platforms, we'd love to hear your guys' input in the comments below. And if you want to find any of the stuff we talked about in this video, you can find it right here at Evike.com. Don't worry, Spencer and I will stand here waiting while you do that.